Coming up on Arirang News, Chinese President Xi Jinping will be visiting North Korea later this week, the first Chinese leader to do so in well over a decade. It could have implications for the G20 summit coming up later this month. A survey finds South Korean companies feel they're struggling to compete with firms in other countries. With revenues going down, they say they need to find new sources of growth and ways to make the most of the latest technologies. And Facebook has taken down advertisements by the Chinese tech firm Huawei, in which it had criticized its blacklisting by the U.S. Facebook says the ad violated its policies on transparency. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. North Korea is getting ready to roll out the red carpet in a big way for Chinese President Xi Jinping, who it's been announced will be visiting Pyeongyang this week. He'll be there from Thursday to Friday in the first visit to North Korea by any Chinese leader in 14 years. Some think it could mean a breakthrough in the denuclearization deadlock with the G20 summit just a few days away. Ko Ryun-hee has our top story.
Amid the deadlock in denuclearization talks between Pyongyang and Washington, the International Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China revealed on Monday that Chinese leader Xi Jinping will visit the North from June 20th to the 21st. North Korea state media also confirmed the visit.
At the invitation of Kim Jong-un, chairman of the Workers' Party of Korea and chairman of the State Affairs Commission of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Chinese President Xi Jinping will pay a state visit to our country from June 20th to 21st.
This will mark President Xi's first trip to North Korea since he came to power in 2012. The last Chinese leader to visit the North was Hu Jintao in 2005. Chinese state media reports the visit marks the 70th anniversary of China and North Korea establishing diplomatic ties and will further contribute to improving bilateral relations. As for the rough itinerary, the two leaders are not only expected to discuss related issues but also participate in activities such as visiting the Sino-North Korean Friendship Tower in Pyongyang. This monument commemorates Chinese soldiers who fought alongside North Koreans during the Korean War. The visit comes after North Korea's denuclearization talks with the U.S. collapsed dramatically in Hanoi earlier this year. An analyst told the South China Morning Post on Monday that the visit has great geopolitical significance and will allow Beijing to continue to play an important role in Korean Peninsula affairs. It's also worth noting that the meeting in North Korea will take place a week before the G20 summit in Japan, where U.S. President Donald Trump and President Xi are expected to meet amid the escalating trade tensions between the two countries. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Now, responding to news of President Xi's visit to North Korea, the United States has reiterated that its goal is still the North's final, fully verified denuclearization. The White House said that is a focus of the international community as well. And it'll serve as another reminder for Kim Jong-un of the denuclearization pledge he made to President Trump during their first summit last year. President Xi's trip to the North has been a big story internationally. Some see it having implications for the nuclear talks with the U.S. and a connection to the trade war. Kim Yo-sun has this report.
International media outlets are sharply focused on the news that Chinese President Xi Jinping will visit North Korea this week. They are interested to see what role Beijing will play, especially against the backdrop of prolonged China-U.S. trade tensions and stalled denuclearization negotiations between Pyongyang and Washington. The Washington Post explained that President Xi's visit will mark diplomatic history for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un following the North Korea-U.S. summit in Hanoi in February, which ended prematurely with no deal. Citing experts, it also said the visit could be a sign that Beijing's will to impose continued sanctions against the North is waning amid its continued standoff with Washington over trade. The New York Times described President Xi's visit to Pyongyang as a surprise move, shortly ahead of the G20 summit in Osaka, where the leaders of China and the U.S. are likely to meet. Citing Chinese analysts, the report says Xi's visit could revive the disarmament talks between Trump and Kim, while noting that Beijing remains Pyongyang's most important ally. CNN and the Associated Press also reported on President Xi's scheduled visit, which coincides with the 70th anniversary of the establishment of ties between Pyongyang and Beijing. Japan's Kyodo News Agency forecasts Xi and Kim will discuss measures to seek a breakthrough in stalled denuclearization talks, as well as ways to cooperate economically. It also explained the two allies will showcase their traditional friendly ties while intensifying strategic solidarity. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
A visit by President Xi had been expected at some point, with Kim Jong-un having gone to China 4 times last year. But why right now, and how does it help the two sides? Oh Jung-hee explains.
A fifth face-to-face between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping, this time in the North Korean capital. Last year, there were 4 summits between Kim and Xi, all in China, with Kim making the trip there. And it's been expected that Xi would visit North Korea in return this year. Regarding why it has to be now, experts say China wants to show the U.S. its still strong influence over North Korea amid the trade war and political tensions over Hong Kong and Taiwan.
This year, North Korea and China celebrate 70 years of diplomatic ties. But other than that, China intends to show the US that it's got the North Korea card amid intensifying conflicts with the US.
For North Korea, Xi's visit is a gigantic blessing, a pundit says.
Diplomatically, it's the first visit to North Korea by a Chinese president in 14 years, which can show that the North is no longer an isolated state. It's a big present to Kim Jong-un, who failed to achieve much at summits in Hanoi and Vladivostok. Also, Xi's visit shows that China trusts and supports North Korea's domestic politics, which helps in regime security.
Humanitarian assistance may also follow, with China offering large amounts of rice and fertilizer to the north. As to whether the upcoming summit would help revive the stalled nuclear talks, experts were doubtful. They say what China aims is to show its influence in the region amid its hegemonic competition with the U.S. The leaders, Kim and Xi, therefore are likely to highlight their original stance, calling for the North's regime security and step-by-step denuclearization. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, South Korea's foreign minister says she sees good signs that North Korea and the U.S. will get back to talks on denuclearization. Minister Kang said so Tuesday on her way back to Korea from her meeting in Moscow with the Russian foreign minister. But she did not say specifically what those signs might be. The two reportedly discussed their countries' bilateral exchanges in a range of areas, as well as the current situation on the Korean peninsula and Russia's role in it. Here's the foreign minister.
We agreed that we need to revive the momentum for dialogue and also discussed what kind of messages we need to send out as there are major summits ahead.
Meanwhile, Seoul's nuclear envoy Lee Do-hoon left Tuesday morning for Washington. There he'll be giving a keynote speech at a conference and meeting with his U.S. counterpart, Stephen Biegun. 4 North Korean fishermen were rescued last Saturday from the East Sea, and 2 of them say they want to defect to the south. Seoul's Unification Ministry says the other 2 were sent back to the north this morning through the inter-Korean border village of Panmunjom. The government says it notified Pyeongyang of the fact through the Joint Liaison Office Monday morning, and the North responded later in the day, though how it responded is not known. The 2 North Koreans made it clear that they wish to stay in the South, and so they'll go through the usual defection procedures, including a re-education process. The South Korean cabinet has endorsed the nomination of the country's soon-to-be new prosecutor-general, Yoon Seok-yeol. Yoon was named by President Moon on Monday as his replacement for Moon Moo-il, who retires next month. The cabinet approved his nomination this morning in a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun, as required by the Constitution. After the president gives his approval, Yoon's nomination will go to the National Assembly. There will be a hearing on his nomination, but the president can appoint him even without the Assembly's approval. The hearing has to be completed within 20 days after the request is sent, but lawmakers can get another 10 days if they need it. This July, Seoul will be hosting Asia's biggest animation festival. It's the Seoul International Cartoon and Animation Festival, starting on July 17th and running through the 21st at the COEX Convention Center in southern Seoul. This is the event's 23rd edition, and this time the theme is Innovative Change. They'll be screening 103 animated works from 28 different countries, and there'll be booths for webtoon artists, costume play performers, and animation companies. Tickets for screenings are available on Naver and Interpark. K-pop boy band BTS won a major award on Sunday at this year's Radio Disney Music Awards. It was the Global Phenom Award in recognition of their global influence in music, fashion, and dance. It's the second year BTS have won a Disney Award. Last year, they won 4. Best Duo/Group, Best Dance Track, Best Song That Makes You Smile, and Fiercest Fans. The group did not perform at the ceremony, though, because they were holding concerts and fan meetings in Busan over the weekend. Those events attracted some 44,000 fans. Facebook has removed from its platform ads by Huawei, slamming the claims by the U.S. that it's been spying on its users on behalf of the Chinese government. Meanwhile, Huawei has put a number on the impact it expects to see from the Trump administration's blacklisting of it. Kim Da-mi has the details.
Facebook is taking a tough stance on Huawei advertisements for being too political. The UK-based daily The Telegraph reported on Sunday that the social network recently removed several ads purchased by the Chinese tech giant for violating its transparency rules. In one of the ads posted at the end of May and taken down last week, Huawei warned against mixing politics with technology, featuring a quote from its chairman, Ren Zhengfei. Reaching over 1 million users in a month, the ad ran without a disclaimer about who paid for it, which is a requirement for Facebook ads about social issues, elections, or politics. The Trump administration blacklisted Huawei last month amid concerns the Chinese firm could use its equipment to spy on other nations on behalf of the Chinese government. Ever since, the U.S. has been lobbying its allies to rebuff the company's 5G network proposals. Huawei, however, continues to deny Washington's claims. While running an online ad campaign to try and convince people it's trustworthy, the chairman of Huawei said the tech giant will miss a sales forecast by about $30 billion over the next couple of years because of the U.S. campaign. Ren Zhengfei said Huawei is expected to post a revenue of about $100 billion in 2019, a decline from last year's $107 billion. While his comments seem to reveal the weight of the blacklisting of Huawei's financial outlook, Ren did not specify how he reached the $30 billion figure or his forecast for the company's 2020 revenue outlook. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
There have been expectations that the U.S. and Chinese leaders will talk trade when they go to the G20 summit next week in Japan. But the U.S. Commerce Secretary is playing down the prospects of a breakthrough. Speaking Monday to CNBC, Secretary Wilbur Ross said the G20 is not a place where Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping can negotiate what he called a 2,500-page agreement. But he said there could be some kind of a deal laying out a way forward. Ross said they'll have a deal eventually, but he emphasized that President Trump will put more tariffs on China if the talks continue to stall. It's time now for an in-depth look at the global markets this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Kiwoom Securities. Mr. Yu, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So just ahead of this week's Fed meeting, U.S. stocks were up a little bit. The Dow about 0.1%, the S&P the same. What was driving the gains overnight, and how about Asian markets?
Yes, as for the U.S. market, particularly the NASDAQ has shown some rise. It showed 0.62% rise because of the specific news on M&A deals. Pfizer announced that it will acquire Array Biopharmaceutical, which is a anti-cancer drug manufacturer, for $11.4 billion. And that resulted into Array Biopharmaceutical rising by 56.9% on one day, and also Pfizer rising by 0.28%. Any cancer treatment companies such as Incyte, Robin, and Turning Point Therapeutics all risen by somewhere between 5 to 15% in terms of stock prices. As a result, anything related to bio-related ETFs, which is XBI and IBB and various others, has shown quite significant rise. That kind of triggered to the Asian market. If you look at the Shanghai, firmly the index itself was flat, but the Shenzhen index has risen by about 0.3%. As for Korea, it was kind of opposite. where the Korean Kospi has risen by 0.38%, but the Kosdaq was down by 0.59%, and also Nikkei was down 0.72%. I think that the market is still kind of concerned in regards to the U.S.-China trade talks, even though there's a possibility of the rate cut coming through on probably in July. The meetings for the FOMC this week is not going to have any kind of rate cut coming through. And that's the reason why the investors are still cautious in terms of investing heavily in expectation of liquidity increase in the market.
Got it. Well, the U.S. measures against Huawei, the Chinese tech giant, have really dealt a blow. As we just heard, the company says the blacklisting is going to cost it some $30 billion this year and next. Its competitors and its business partners, therefore, have been eyeing Korean companies now. What's Huawei planning to do about all this?
Right. If you hear the news, the Huawei CEO, the founder, Ran Zhangfei, said that company revenue will be about $100 billion for 2019 and 2020. That means about $30 billion hit to the revenue versus its previous forecast. Now, this is clearly a negative news for the company. If you look at it, they've been, increasing the shares very aggressively, and then last year they have generated close to $100 billion in profits, in revenues. But going into the future, there is not going to be any growth in terms of the revenues. So clearly, the biggest hit will be coming from the mobile sales because the U.S. blacklist restricts the American businesses selling products to Chinese Huawei, and most of those supplies are related to the phone productions. The Bloombergs and other foreign forecasters are estimating that the smartphone shipment will decline by somewhere between 40 to 60 million units this year. That could be clearly blow to the market share for Huawei. And in terms of who will be gaining that market share, most of the people expect that to be Samsung and somewhat for the Apple. Right now, if you look at the market share, Samsung has 20.3% market share in terms of the handsets, but it is expected to rise to 24.5% in terms of the market share. As for the Huawei, currently they hold about 14% in market share, but it is expected to go down to 9.2% in the future. So that is definitely good news for Samsung Electronics. But as for the other part of the business, clearly the components-related supplies will be damaged because the Huawei will not be able to produce as much in terms of the handset. Clearly, the memory semiconductors such as the DRAM and RAM flash will be having some difficulties, and also display panels as well as the OLED related parts plays. So clearly that is negative news. But as for the Samsung, that is only 2 to 2.5% of total sales. The impact is not going to be as much. Whereas the SK Hynix, the semiconductor company, obviously estimates that about 10 to 15% of total sales will be affected. So yes, it is a mixed news. Clearly, the major players, Samsung Electronics, will be benefiting from this kind of change.
Right. Well, real quick, with this trade war going on, China's been reducing its holdings of U.S. treasuries compared to last year. They're down around $70 billion. Is this a card China can play when they meet the U.S. next week at the G20, or what else might they want to do?
I think that's probably difficult. I don't think that the reducing the U.S. treasury will be a good news for China. If you look at it, the U.S. treasury is the safest asset for foreign investors, and there's a high demand. And as you can see that the 10-year treasury bond rate has fallen to 2.1% from last year's 3.2%. So it is becoming a bit expensive now. But nevertheless, still there's a huge demand, and that's the reason why the rates were going down. Now, if you look at China holding a total amount of foreign reserve of $3 trillion US dollars, including the U.S. bond holdings, versus it has external debt of about $2 trillion. So if you're trying to pay off that external debt, clearly the foreign reserve will be going down very significantly. Yes, they can withstand the foreign outflows, but if the currency depreciates too fast, well above, say, 7 yuan to dollars, then that's going to be a very negative news for the Chinese corporate balance sheets, which will be definitely major negatives. Now, China's corporate bond, corporate debt is about 150% of the GDP, which is one of the highest numbers. So clearly, we need to see that number coming down. So they can't really use the treasury selling to probably have a better deals in terms of the U.S.-China trade talk. I think that they're not going to have much other cards except the rare earth cards and some other cards where they can pump up the domestic economies. But in general, that is actually boosting the economy by themselves rather than trying to negotiate with the U.S. So I think that they will meet on the 29th, 28th in G20 meetings. In terms of whether some kind of outcome will come out, I doubt that. But nevertheless, they are in need to negotiate. And we do think that some kind of deal will be struck before the end of the year.
All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we're going to have to leave it today. Thank you for coming on again. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea's exports have fallen big time in recent months, and apparently local companies feel they're losing their competitiveness. A survey by the Chamber of Commerce shows companies are having a hard time generating new growth momentum, and they're losing ground to rivals around the world. Kim Hye-sung reports.
South Korean companies are sandwiched between those from developed and developing countries struggling to come up with new future businesses and fully utilizing technologies related to the fourth industrial revolution. These are the bleak findings of a new survey by the Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry on 500 local manufacturing companies. More than 41% of respondents said their competitiveness is at the level of or behind emerging countries like China. That's 4 times higher than the corresponding result in 2010 when only 10% of local firms said that was the case. More than 60% of those surveyed said they're behind advanced countries like the U.S., a whopping 20 percentage points higher than the 2010 survey.
South Korean companies are losing competitiveness mainly due to a lack of innovation. Technology convergence across manufacturing, IT, and services is the new trend of the fourth industrial revolution. But regulations are so stifling that it's difficult for companies to try new things. Other countries have already eased regulations to encourage investment and nurture experts.
In fact, 2 out of 3 companies surveyed said they haven't found new businesses as a source of growth, citing a lack of technology funding and strict regulations. Near half said they aren't using new technologies related to the fourth industrial revolution, such as AI and big data, and only 6% said they are actively using the technologies. A separate report on corporate management by the Bank of Korea released on Tuesday shows South Korean companies posted negative revenue growth in the first quarter, mainly due to the sluggish manufacturing sector, including firms in the electronics and petrochemical industries. Their debt ratio also increased on quarter. The Korea Chamber of Commerce and Industry says a firm platform to nurture fourth industrial revolution-related technology, improved corporate investment, and deregulation are required to ensure South Korea's manufacturers stay globally competitive in the years to come. Kim Hye-sung, Arirang News.
Korea's small and mid-sized companies are calling for a freeze in the minimum wage for next year. 15 associations for small business, including the Korea Federation of SMEs, said Tuesday that the double-digit minimum wage hikes of the last 2 years have caused difficulties for their businesses because of bigger payroll costs. They want no wage hike next year and say that wage policy should take into account the company's ability to pay and labor productivity by reflecting those differences across industries. The Korea Federation of SMEs said Korea's minimum wage to income ratio ranks 4th among OECD countries, while labor productivity ranks 29th. Korea's minimum wage is currently about $7 an hour. The average amount of money spent in South Korea by foreign tourists has decreased steadily over the past year, according to research by the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism and the Korea Tourism Organization. Foreign tourists spent an average of $1,300 per trip in the first quarter of this year. That's a 12% drop compared to the same period last year and the 4th straight quarterly decline. Industry insiders attribute the fall to China's ban on group tours to South Korea following Seoul's deployment of a U.S. missile defense system. South Korea's top internet portal, Naver, is now offering its mobile payment service, Naver Pay, in Japan. It's part of a deal with the Japanese company Line Pay. Naver Pay users in Japan just need to scan the QR code at the store or present their own QR code, the same as with Line Pay. Line Pay is already accepted at about 1.6 million stores. The introduction of Naver Pay will enable people to avoid paying fees to change their money. Naver Pay has 30 million users, which accounts for 58% of the Korean population. The United Nations projects the world population to reach nearly 11 billion by the end of the century. Growth rates vary, though, and some countries will likely see their populations shrink. The UN report projects the world's population to hit 9.7 billion in 2050 and peak by the end of the century at 10.9 billion. One reason, it says, is longer life expectancies, which is projected to rise from the current 72.9 years to around 77 years by 2050. Half of the population growth between now and 2050 is expected to come from just 9 countries, including India, Nigeria, and Pakistan. And that does it for this newscast. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.